The Transport Workers Union is launching a national campaign against the exploitation of overseas workers and for the need for companies to provide better skills and training to our young people. Now, the Aussie Rights campaign is calling on candidates in the upcoming federal election to declare whether or not they're supporting reforms to Australia's labour laws and immigration system to stamp out exploitation and provide better pathways to employment for young Australians. Let's talk to the Secretary of the Transport Workers Union. That's Tony Sheldon. Tony, thanks for joining us. First of all, what provable information have we got that there has been exploitation? Because this has been somewhat of a political football, and in fact, even the federal government, up until recently, tried to suggest that, look, there might be a few anomalies, but in general, everything's working fine.
Well, I think what clearly has happened, just even up until January this year, which is some of the latest figures on 457 visas, which are those immigration work visas, that we've actually seen a decline in 1% last year in hotels and restaurants spending, but we've seen a substantial increase now to 240 people a month coming in as cooks. So we've actually seen expansions whilst there's a decline. And just today, very brave young man, Dong Nguyen, gave us evidence which he's publicly talked about, where he was paid $30,000 to an immigration consultant to get a job as a chef, and found that he's a maintenance man getting $15 an hour and 20 hours a week.
How can that happen?
Because what's happening is that the test of people actually going into these jobs is non-existent. There does not have a transparency about it. It means that companies that are doing the right thing, many companies are competing now with companies that see this as a cheap and nasty and low-bottom way of turning around and actually making a quicker dollar at some human being's expense, in this case, Dong's.
Can I tell you something interesting? When we had Professor Andrew Stewart on our program, who is somewhat of an expert in industrial relations and very highly thought of by both sides of politics, he made the point that once upon a time there used to be a list of professions or skills that were on a wanted list, and there were, it wasn't all skill, it was certain jobs which were very hard to find people for. But in his words, the last time we had a conversation about this, he said, Leon, the problem now is that virtually every profession that exists is on that list.
That's absolutely right. There's been a list that's only got longer without any real test in the labour market about are those skills required. And what we've seen now in the case of what's been proposed by both sides of politics, and there's been some changes and some strengthening, but it needs to go further. And what's being proposed by the coalition actually is to wind back some of those improvements which still need to go further to protect Aussie jobs.
Look, see, Tony, you know better than me. Once upon a time, when we had state utilities and institutions owned by the taxpayer, they would be the primary trainer for talent. I mean, we in South Australia used to have an ENWS, we had it's a utilities co-op, and they used to do literally thousands and thousands of apprentices, all right? Yes. And, of course, the training they got from the state instrumentalities, there was a, if you like, inbuilt social obligation. Now, since we've flogged everything off, and what we haven't yet flogged off, we're treating as if we have flogged it off, none of this happens now. Or when I say none, comparative to what used to be, is very little.
Well, I think you've actually really hit the nail on the head. It's state utilities, it's major employers, for example, Qantas. There's the number of apprentices that companies are bringing in, and governments have substantially reduced. Trying to squeeze the last dollar out of what they're calling efficiencies, but are deficiencies for the Australian community. And this whole question about job skills, about apprentices for the future, and just simply then saying going overseas to bring workers in and exploit them is not the recipe for actually making a better society, a better community, and giving our young kids an opportunity in the future. Now, there is a real, very fundamental breakdown about skilling up Australians, and this question about exploited workers coming in this country. And if you're a company competing in that environment, then companies are then driven to actually try to meet like with like. And that means where governments have to step in and regulate, or they have to step in and expose this sort of inappropriate practices.
Well, Tony, thank you for joining us. That's the National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union.